Oxford scientist Aubrey de Grey claims the first human who will live to 1,000 years old is already alive today. And what's sending philosophers into a panic isn't the possibility that he's wrong, but the possibility that he's right. Google, Jeff Bezos, and laboratories whose names you've never heard are burning through billions of dollars toward a single target, making death a choice before 2045. No more disease, no more suffering, no more loss. And not a single scripture, constitution, or legal system in the world has any idea what to do if they succeed. Today we're going on a journey. From the darkest caves at the dawn of history, through every war and every plague that nearly wiped us out, all the way to a future where humanity finally seizes its greatest dream, to become God over itself. But I need to warn you from the start. This is not a story about triumph. It's a story about a paradox, about how the paradise we've been chasing for hundreds of thousands of years may turn out to be the most subtle and most silent hell ever created. At the end of this journey, there's a question we'll face together, one that may change the way you see your own life, including every hardship you're living through right now. But before we get there, we need to go deeper first, all the way back to the very beginning of everything. There is one word that captures the entire longing of humanity throughout history. One word that is so beautiful on the surface, so deadly within. That word is utopia. A world without suffering, without fear, without injustice. Paradise, but built on earth by human hands. But there is something hidden inside that word, something its creator planted there deliberately. The word utopia was first popularized 500 years ago by the philosopher Thomas More, and he chose it not by accident, because buried in its Greek roots lies a chilling riddle. Utopos, a place that exists nowhere. Let that sink in. The wisest minds of their age had been quietly whispering to us from the very beginning. The perfect place, in its very essence, is a place that will never truly exist. Not because we failed to try hard enough, not because we lacked the intelligence, but because it was never there to begin with. But we never listened. We could never stop longing for it. Every generation, every tribe, every religion, and every political ideology has ultimately promised the same thing, some version of that paradise. Follow this path, they say, and your suffering will end. The promise is always identical, only the uniforms change. So the question is no longer whether humanity wants utopia. We always have, that much is certain. The real question, the one we rarely dare to ask, is how far are we willing to go to reach it? How much are we prepared to sacrifice? And who, in the end, foots the bill? To understand where this dream will take us in the future, we must be willing to look back and bear witness to just how long and how bloody the road we have already walked in its pursuit truly was. Because humanity's future is always buried within the wounds of its past, and those wounds run deeper than we have ever dared to measure. We begin at the true point zero. Tens of thousands of years ago, there were no homes, no laws, no guarantee that you would still be breathing when the sun rose again. Every single day was one solitary wager between life and death. You hunted, or you were hunted. A sudden shift in the weather could freeze you to death in a single night. A wild animal could tear your child away right before your eyes, and there was nothing you could do. Hunger was not a threat. Hunger was a permanent companion. No one was thinking about utopia back then. The greatest dream of early humans was far simpler and far more desperate. May I still be alive when the sun rises again. That was the ceiling of human ambition at its very starting point. And so humans learned to farm. We stopped wandering and began to settle. Villages grew into cities, cities into kingdoms. For the first time, there was surplus food, there was leisure, there was something we came to call civilization. On the surface, this sounds like the first step toward paradise. But here lies the first great irony of our history. Once humans no longer feared wild beasts, they began to fear one another. Fertile land became something worth fighting over. Full granaries had to be defended with blood. And so came tribal warfare, power struggles, and conquest. To impose order on that chaos, humans created laws and hierarchies. But whose laws? Laws made by the powerful to serve the powerful. Kings and slaves emerged. nobles and commoners. A privileged few lived in grand palaces, while millions of others toiled under the lash. The threat had changed its face, but the suffering remained the same, merely wearing a different costume. And this is precisely where we must pause for a moment, because this pattern will repeat itself again and again and again throughout the history we are about to examine together. Then came the centuries we know as the Dark Ages. The human mind was imprisoned, not by iron bars, but by dogma, by the fear of asking questions, of doubting, of thinking differently. Those who dared to challenge prevailing beliefs were often silenced in the most brutal ways imaginable. As if that were not enough, there came the Black Death. The Black Death, a plague that swept across continents and wiped out nearly half the population of an entire continent within the span of just a few years. Death arrived so swiftly and so randomly that people barely had time to grieve. Nearly half a continent, gone. Yet it was from those very ashes and that mass death that something beautiful slowly began to grow. Humans started asking questions again. They dared to see the world through new eyes. This was the Renaissance, a rebirth, an era in which art, science, and reason rose from the grave. For the first time, humanity whispered, "Perhaps we can fix this world ourselves." A small whisper, but it was that whisper that would change everything. So ask yourself, did the comforts we take for granted today simply appear out of nowhere, or were they wrested from the deepest, most impenetrable darkness? That whisper became a roar when humanity discovered the power of the steam engine. Suddenly, a single machine could replace hundreds of human hands. Factories rose, cities swelled, wealth was created on a scale no one had ever imagined. This was the Industrial Revolution. But once again, that paradise came with a price. Behind the glittering facade of progress, millions of workers, including children, were wrung dry for over a dozen hours a day in dark and toxic factories for wages that barely kept them alive. Human beings were no longer simply living. They had been reduced to cogs inside a vast machine. The chasm between the rich and the poor yawned so wide that it gave birth to fury, ideology, and the seeds of revolution. And before we could see where those seeds would grow, the 20th century arrived, bringing with it something that surpassed even the darkest limits of everything we had ever feared. The 20th century, perhaps the darkest and yet most consequential century in all of human history. In less than 50 years, we were struck 4 times in succession, as though the universe itself was testing whether this species deserved to go on existing. The first blow, World War I, the first war in history capable of slaughtering human beings on an industrial scale, using killing machines of our own creation. Before those wounds could even begin to heal, the second blow arrived. The Spanish flu pandemic, which claimed even more lives than the war itself. The third blow, the global economic collapse, the Great Depression, which stripped millions of families of everything they had overnight. And it was from that despair that the final monster was born. World War II, a war ended by a single flash of light, the atomic bomb, which for the first time gave humanity the power to annihilate itself completely. It was at the very edge of that abyss, at the brink of extinction, that something inside us finally changed. For the first time in history, people from every corner of the world stopped, looked upon the mountains of dead they had created with their own hands and said, "Enough." And so we built bridges, not walls. Not because we had suddenly become angels, but because we were finally frightened enough and wise enough to understand one thing. We could only survive if we survived together. Every comfort you enjoy today was built upon the bones and tears of countless generations who came before you. The electricity in your home, the medicine in your cabinet, the sense of safety when you sleep tonight. All of it is the legacy of a struggle paid for at a price you've never seen the bill for. But if this entire long journey has taught us one thing, the question now sharpens to the bone. Have we truly arrived at the end of that journey, or are we simply standing in a brief pause before the next chapter begins? And here is where we stand. Consider this for a moment. If you could explain your life today to a human being from 1,000 years ago, they wouldn't call it technology. They would call it paradise. Food from every corner of the world delivered without leaving your chair. the entire sum of human knowledge held in the palm of your hand, and diseases that once wiped out entire villages now cured with a single small pill. Objectively, we are the most comfortable, most healthy, and most secure generation in the entire history of human civilization. No other sentence more accurately describes where we stand right now. But, and this is a but we must look squarely in the face, have we truly arrived at utopia? Of course not. Because tonight, there are still children going to sleep hungry, while food is being thrown away somewhere else. There is still a gaping chasm between the handful of people who control nearly everything and the billions scrambling for what remains. There are still human beings oppressed simply for being different. This paradox, then, is no mere irony. It is an open wound at the heart of our civilization. And looming over all of it is one threat we created ourselves, a planet slowly warming, one that could someday turn and swallow us whole. We have come so far, yet that finish line, that perfect paradise, still feels just as distant as it ever did. Like the horizon, the harder we run toward it, the further it retreats. And so a question emerges that is nothing short of staggering. What if this time is different? What if, for the first time in history, we are genuinely holding the tools to reach it, not merely dreaming, but actually building it? The answer lies within something we have long regarded as far too simple. Thinkers have given it many names. Some call it the Great Reset, a moment in which humanity, armed with technology now indistinguishable from magic, chooses to reboot the entire civilization from its very roots. For thousands of years, we have proven one thing in the most painful way possible. Humans are poor rulers. We are greedy. We take sides. We are corrupt. Every time power is handed to someone, sooner or later that power rots from within. And so in the future, humanity makes the most radical decision in its history. It surrenders the wheel of civilization to something that is not human. An artificial intelligence that knows no hunger, no ambition, no grudge. One that decides everything solely on the basis of pure logic and pure justice. A ruler that cannot be bribed, cannot be deceived, cannot be swayed by lobbying or tears. For the first time in the history of civilization, the world is governed by something that truly has no personal interest whatsoever. Then, humanity's oldest problem is finally solved: scarcity. Energy is harvested from the same reaction that ignites the sun: limitless, nearly free. Fueled by it, machines and robots produce food, clothing, and shelter, in boundless abundance for every person without exception. And when every need is met without us having to work, for the first time humanity is truly free. No more tedious labor, no more poverty, no more grinding away just to survive. Every human being is free to spend their entire life doing whatever they choose. But none of that compares to the victory that follows. Technology can now repair our bodies at the cellular level, even at the level of our own genetic code. Cancer, gone. Hereditary disease, erased from the bloodline forever. Beyond that, humans can now reshape themselves however they wish. Height, face, gender, eye color, all of it changeable, like swapping out a set of clothes. The body is no longer a fate handed to you at birth. It becomes a canvas that can be repainted at any time. And then comes the pinnacle. Cellular regeneration technology halts the aging process itself. Your body stops weakening, stops aging, stops dying. For the first time since life began on this planet, a living creature becomes immortal. Humanity, at last, defeats death. And here is the final stop, the most breathtaking and the most terrifying of all. Scientists of the future have finally succeeded in mapping the human brain so completely that they can reach directly into the source of every feeling we have. You no longer need to struggle for years just to feel the rush of a great achievement. You simply ask for it, and the feeling floods in instantly. You no longer need to search, to wait, or to be wounded in pursuit of true love. You can command your brain to feel the deepest, most intoxicating love imaginable whenever you choose. Every joy, every satisfaction, every moment of elation, all of it available on demand in whatever quantity you desire, forever. This is the finish line that every human being has been chasing in every era since the very first of us gazed up at the night sky and longed for a better world. No suffering, no death, no limits. Humanity at last has become God. But, and this is the question not one of these architects of paradise has ever answered, what remains of the human being when all struggle has been erased, all pain extinguished, and every desire can be ordered like an item off a lunch menu? A philosopher named Robert Nozick once proposed a simple thought experiment, but its answer will haunt us far longer than we might expect. It goes like this. There is a machine. Step inside and it can give you any experience you want. To be the most successful, the most loved, the happiest person alive. Everything feels 100% real. You won't even remember that you're inside a machine. Nozick then asks, would you plug in? Forever. Perfect, uninterrupted happiness. No pain, no failure, no loss. Only pure pleasure for the rest of your life. And something strange happened. Almost everyone, when asked, said no. Yet the machine promised perfection. So the question was no longer about the machine itself. The question became, what is it inside us that screams that false happiness means nothing? The answer is this. The value of everything in life does not come from the thing itself. It comes from the struggle to attain it. A sip of water tastes sweet because you have known thirst. Coming home feels like relief because you have known what it is to be lost. Pain is not the opposite of happiness. Pain is the price of happiness. It is suffering that gives relief its meaning. It is darkness that makes light matter. Without one side, the other carries no weight at all. But notice where this logic takes us, because it is precisely at that point that something far darker begins to come into view. In a perfect world, where every desire is fulfilled instantly without any struggle whatsoever, something we never anticipated happens. Everything loses its value. When love can be felt simply by pressing a button, love is no longer precious. When success arrives without ever having to fight for it, success becomes hollow. When happiness is available in unlimited supply, it ceases to be happiness. It becomes nothing more than a dull, ordinary state of being. More than 100 years ago, Nietzsche already warned us about this. He imagined the emergence of a figure he called the last man, the man at the end of history, who has discovered perfect comfort. No more grand dreams, no more suffering, no more reason to strive. A creature that is content, warm, and safe, and for precisely that reason, utterly empty. For Nietzsche, this was the most tragic fate that could befall humanity. Not death, not destruction, but total satisfaction that strips everything away. This is not philosophy floating abstractly on the page. It explains something you may have felt yourself. Why, after finally reaching a great goal you spent years chasing, a strange emptiness crept in rather than the happiness you expected. Because it was the struggle that made you feel alive, not the finish line. In a world without gaps, human beings would no longer know what fear is, and so they would never know what courage is either. They would no longer know surprise, because everything would be certain. They would no longer know the beauty of happy accidents, because nothing would ever be unexpected. But the most devastating loss of all, they would forfeit the one thing that has quietly fueled every struggle in human history: hope. Because hope can only exist when there is something we do not yet have. The emptiness of a life without hope, an existence with no tomorrow to look forward to, is ultimately more tormenting than any physical pain. Not because you are suffering, but because you no longer have a reason to hold on. They would be envious. Those immortal, unwounded gods, who possess everything, would gaze back through the corridor of time, staring at us, those who can still weep when they lose something, who can still feel their hearts race with nervousness and anticipation, who can still taste the sweetness of something earned through real, grueling effort. Those gods possess eternity, but they do not possess the one thing we have right now, freely, without even realizing it. They do not possess meaning, and the question that remains is this: if imperfection is the very source of all meaning, then what should we do with this imperfect life we have been given? Allow me to say something that may sound strange. The imperfection in your life, it is not a curse. The fact that you do not know what tomorrow holds is precisely what makes tomorrow worth looking forward to. The fact that your time is limited is precisely what makes every moment precious. If life went on forever, not a single day would be special. Because there would always be another day in an endless, uncountable succession. Because flowers wilt, we stop to admire them. Because the sun sets, we stop to watch it. Scarcity is what creates meaning. But wait, because this is precisely where most of us misread the map. The suffering you are going through right now, the failure that fills you with shame, the heartbreak that keeps you awake at night, the struggle that feels like it will never end. None of that is proof that your life is broken. All of this is proof that your life is real. The tears drying on your cheeks tonight, the imperfections you despise in yourself, the steep road you are climbing. These are what make life itself complete. These are the things that the gods of the future will never be able to buy with all their power. You, with all your limitations, are living through an era that will one day be envied by beings equal to God. So the question is no longer whether your life is perfect enough, but whether you have been present enough to truly feel it. We have arrived at one conclusion that seems final. The gods of the future live in a hollow perfection. They possess everything except meaning. And so they gaze backward, envious of a world filled with suffering, struggle, and genuine love. So the real question is no longer about power or immortality. The question is, what does something with unlimited power do when it desperately longs for the one thing it can no longer feel? There is only one answer. It creates it. These perfect beings in their emptiness ultimately decide to build an entirely new world from scratch, a world deliberately made imperfect, filled with flaws, struggle, and pain. A world whose inhabitants carry no memory of the future, so that they may feel once more what the gods lost long ago: ignorance, surprise, and pure, unspoiled hope. Designed with a single purpose, so that the beings within it could rediscover the sweetness of struggle, the tenderness of genuine love, the preciousness of time that runs out. A world that looks remarkably like our own. And this is the most unsettling possibility in our entire line of thinking. Serious thinkers are debating this today, not as fantasy, but as a genuine philosophical proposition. What if we are already too late? What if the entire journey from the cave to godhood is not our future? What if that were our past? What if the world you're living in right now, with all its suffering and imperfection, is a world deliberately created by those utopian humans? And all of us, you, me, every person who has ever lived, are living through an experience that was beautifully designed. Think about what that means. The tears you shed tonight, the struggles you face every single day, the love you feel and sometimes let slip away. If this proposition is true, none of that is meaningless accident. All of it is the most precious thing in the entire universe, so precious that something equivalent to God was willing to surrender its immortality just to feel it one more time. No one knows whether this is true. I don't know. You don't know. But therein lies the power of this idea, not in its certainty, but in what it does to the way we see our own imperfection. Perhaps we are not flawed creations that failed to reach perfection. Perhaps we are perfection itself, deliberately stripped down so that we might feel something more real than merely being perfect. So tonight, when you feel the weight of your life pressing down on you, when you feel imperfect, when you cry in silence, remember this one staggering possibility. Perhaps you are living out exactly the life that gods have longed for. But the biggest question doesn't end here. Because if we are their creation, what are we supposed to do with that knowledge?